In the standard history of early Christian expansion, the timeline is almost always anchored to the Mediterranean. The narrative follows a well-worn path from Jerusalem through Greece and into the institutional centers of the Roman Empire and Europe. But 4,000 miles to the east, we find a physical anomaly that breaks this narrative. This stone stele, carved with a Christian cross and Chinese characters in the 8th century, stood in the Tang dynasty capital of Chang'an, modern-day Xi'an. Thousands of miles south, ancient Christian communities thrived on the tropical coasts of India long before the arrival of any European colonialists. And across Central Asia, archaeologists have recovered complex theological manuscripts written in Syriac, a dialect of Aramaic native to Mesopotamia, yet preserved here, thousands of miles from the Mediterranean. These artifacts originate from a single, highly organized institution, the Church of the East. In Western history, they are often relegated to a footnote, dismissed as the Nestorian heresy after their exile from the Roman Empire in 431 AD. That exile did not destroy them. Instead, this community spent the Middle Ages building the most geographically expansive Christian network on the planet, stretching from the Tigris River to the gates of Beijing. Their survival provides a unique case study in religious expansion. It demonstrates how a movement can navigate diverse, often hostile empires without ever relying on state power or military conquest. The split began with a severe political and theological clash at the Council of Ephesus. In 431 AD, Western church leaders branded the Antioch school of thought heretical, effectively excommunicating a massive portion of the Eastern Church. This diagram illustrates the core Christological divide. The Western, Alexandrian view insisted on a hypostatic union, a complete fusion of natures. The Antioch school, however, maintained that the divine and human remained two distinct natures, joined only by a perfect union of will and love. Following the council, Roman authorities began a systematic crackdown. By 489 AD, the emperor ordered the forced closure of the famed theological school of Edessa, the movement's intellectual heart. Fleeing Roman arrest, scholars crossed the border into Nisibis, seeking protection within the Persian Empire. Persian kings suspected these Christians of being Roman spies, leading to persecutions. To survive, the Church declared absolute administrative independence, cutting all institutional ties to the Roman Pope. They secured their place in the Persian court by making themselves indispensable. Eastern Christians focused on secular expertise, becoming the empire's leading physicians, astronomers, and administrators. Being branded heretics by Rome actually ensured their survival. By severing ties with an enemy's state and integrating into the Persian economy, the Church of the East adapted to the Asian political ecosystem. Once their survival in Persia was secure, the Church looked further east. By the 5th and 6th centuries, they began an outward expansion into territories where no Roman legion had ever stepped. This expansion did not rely on state-sponsored missions. The Church of the East spread via ordinary professionals, merchants, doctors, and scribes, who integrated into new societies as useful guests. This map of the Silk Road highlights the arteries of their advance. They partnered with Sogdian traders, the primary merchants of the desert, who carried the faith across thousands of miles of trade networks. In major trading hubs like Samarkand, they established a permanent presence, building small chapels and monastic way stations within these diverse multicultural centers. By 635 AD, this push reached the eastern edge of the continent. A monk named Alapin arrived in Chang'an, the capital of China's Tang dynasty. In China, the Church achieved profound cultural localization. They secured an imperial edict from the emperor and translated their theology into local terms, famously framing the Holy Spirit as pure wind to resonate with Taoist and Buddhist thought. While pushing east by land, they expanded south by sea, establishing permanent maritime dioceses on the Malabar coast of India. This close-up of Syriac script represents the unifying code of their network. Regardless of the local culture, their liturgy and theology remained anchored in the Syriac Peshitta Bible. Because frontier churches were separated from their patriarch in Persia by months of travel, they operated with incredible autonomy, flourishing as independent local communities. By entering new territories as skilled professionals and respectful guests, the Church of the East achieved an intercultural presence that persisted across shifting political borders and hostile dynasties. In 651 AD, the geopolitical landscape was shattered once again. The Persian Empire collapsed, and Islamic armies took control of the Middle East. The Church survived through the dhimmi system. Christians could practice their faith and keep their property in exchange for a tax and a promise not to proselytize to Muslims. Rather than fading away, the Church relocated its patriarch to the new Islamic capital of Baghdad and became the intellectual backbone of the Abbasid Caliphate. They spearheaded a monumental translation movement in Baghdad's House of Wisdom. Scholars like Hunayn ibn Ishaq worked at the highest levels of the caliph's court. This flowchart visualizes the linguistic pipeline scholars used. They translated ancient Greek philosophy and medicine first into their native Syriac and then into Arabic, fueling a new age of Islamic science. This intellectual standing allowed for remarkable theological confidence. Patriarch Timothy I famously engaged in a public, highly intellectual debate on the nature of the Trinity with the Caliph himself. Military defeat under Islam forced the Church to rely on its academic utility to survive. By making themselves indispensable through science and medicine, they secured a protective shield over their entire Asian network. By the 13th century, the geopolitical map was redrawn again by the explosive rise of the Mongol Empire. The Mongols instituted a unique policy of religious tolerance. While they worshipped the sky god Tengri, they viewed all religions as valid paths and exempted clergy from taxes. Christianity was already well established among the Mongols. Centuries of Silk Road missions meant that major nomadic tribes, like the Karaites, were already members of the Church of the East. This led to immense political influence for Christian women in the Mongol court. Figures like Sorgakhtani Beki raised emperors and advocated for Christian interests at the highest levels. At the Church's peak, Christians served in the highest administrative ranks of Kublai Khan's Yuan dynasty in China, working alongside Buddhists and Muslims. This map shows the Church's peak under the Mongols. They maintained 25 massive archdioceses, spanning from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. This global network is perfectly embodied by Rabban Bar Sama, a Beijing-born monk who traveled westward across the entire continent as a diplomat. When he reached Rome and met the Pope, he revealed a vast Christian world in Asia that Europe had entirely forgotten. Under the Mongols, the exiled Church of the East achieved a cosmopolitan global network that rivaled Rome, built on diplomatic integration rather than holy war. This stability was short-lived. In the late 14th century, the Mongol Empire fractured, and exclusive Islamic rule resurged across the Middle East. In China, the new Ming dynasty suppressed all foreign religions, causing the Eastern network to vanish almost entirely. The final blow came from the warlord Timur, whose campaign systematically destroyed Christian centers in Persia and Central Asia. When we return to the map of the 25 dioceses, the devastation is clear. The nodes extinguish rapidly, showing the Church's violent contraction into a few isolated remnants. The last members of the Church sought refuge in the harsh mountain cliffs of Kurdistan and the isolated maritime outposts of India. In deep isolation, these surviving communities fiercely protected their Syriac manuscripts and their core theology for centuries. The Church of the East was ultimately dismantled by geopolitical violence, yet their 1,400-year history demonstrates how an exiled faith can cross oceans and navigate continents, not through swords or state power, but through the patient application of medicine, trade, and cultural resilience.